Hong Kong just right before the implementation of the national security law, and I was involved in the primary election. I was one of the candidates. So yeah, it's definitely really showing the kind of knowledge that we had about Hong Kong, which we knew that it's going to be worse. The political crackdown is coming, but we are also so lucky to have so many brave activists. They still remained and to be an example of courage.
Good evening. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming out this evening and joining us for tonight's program, film screening of Who's Afraid of Nathan Law, followed by a wonderful and I'm sure illuminating Q&A session. So we are very fortunate after the film this evening to be joined by Nathan Law himself, who's going to be joining us remotely, and also by the film's director, Joe Piscatella, who will be joining us on stage here. And then with that, let's dim the lights and play the film.
I heard that someone had put a bounty on me.
I don't think I'm completely safe.
So for me, I try to lay low in order to avoid any identification.
Are you ever worried that they might kidnap you?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you still don't know whether all these precautions that you have can prevent you from harm. But at least you have to try.
My mother always said that don't mess up with Chinese Communist Party. You cannot win over them. But I was just too stubborn to be stopped.
I'm Don Young, Director of Programs from the Center for Asian American Media, and I'm happy to moderate tonight's conversation. And most importantly, I'm happy to welcome up to the stage filmmaker Joe Piscatella. And then there will be a special guest joining us virtually. But first, I want to thank Joe for making this film. I had the honor of meeting him back in October. Oh, and here's our special guest. So everybody, well, first of all, maybe just a moment. This is the second time I've met Joe and Nathan, and it's just an honor. So I'd love to, if we could give them both an applause just for both of them, right? So we're going to have about a half-hour conversation. We'll start with some update. There's a lot that's happened. I had the privilege of I was able to moderate a conversation back in October with both Nathan and Joe, and so much has changed in this short period of time, and somehow the film and what it covers the world has become even more ominous, right? So Joe, maybe if you'd like to start, like what has happened in regards to this Hong Kong and the story you've told?
Sure. Well, just to sort of give you an update, 2 weeks ago, 47 democracy advocates, activists in Hong Kong received their sentence. Many of them had been in jail for almost 4 years awaiting sentencing, Joshua Wong being one of them. Joshua pled guilty, which I believe shaved a third off of his sentence. So he was sentenced to 4 years and 9 months, which is in addition to the nearly 4 years he has already been in jail. Gwyneth Ho, who was a talking head briefly in this cut of the film, received 84 months, in addition to the almost 4 years that she's been in jail. What I find most disheartening about all of that, obviously the jail sentences are horrific. The sentences were not for unlawful assembly. They were not for inciting a riot. They were not for anything you would think they were for. The sentences were for participating in a democratic election. That sends chills up a spine of somebody like me who makes these sorts of films. Nathan, you and I texted the day that this happened. You were still digesting all of this with these 47 activists who many of them you were very close with. What's your reaction?
Well, that's definitely a devastating news to all Hong Kongers, and it could have been easily be me. I left Hong Kong just right before the implementation of the national security law, and I was involved in the primary election. I was one of the candidates. So yeah, it's definitely really showing the kind of knowledge that we had about Hong Kong, which we knew that it's going to be worse. The political crackdown is coming, but we are also so lucky to have so many brave activists. They still remained and to be an example of courage. On the one hand, we definitely have a lot of people being jailed unjustly just because of joining a primary election, exercising merely a mundane practice in every democratic countries. But on the other hand, we've got brave activists who knew that the risks are huge, who knew that sacrifice must be made in the path of fighting for democracy, and they were willing to pay the price. So not only we feel sad about Hong Kong's situation, but we also have to feel grateful about these people coming from Hong Kong and representing Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, Nathan, first, given what has changed in recent weeks, you know, both you and Joe have been presenting the film around the world. Like, how are you seeing this history now that you lived? You know, how are you doing? And then when you see this experience that you live, like, what's going through your mind? I'm curious.
Yeah, at this moment, I'm really tired because I'm based in London, so it's 3:30. So
well, thank you for making the time.
Yeah, that's a very genuine feeling that I have now. But it's really amazing and thankful that Joe made this movie, because this movie is not about me. I'm just the character to tell the story of Hong Kong. And it is really important for us to remember the decade I've been involved in democratic movement. There were a lot of waves, there were a lot of ups and downs, and there were the 2014 umbrella movement, there were the 2016 Legislative Council election, 2017 PRISM, 2019 anti-extradition law protests, and they're all connected. Democratic movement is a marathon, and we have all these dogs, one influencing the other. And for me, it is a great reminder to let everyone know that even though 5 years ago the movement we ended up didn't achieve what we wanted, but that could also be a pathway to the next great movement. And we are probably just in the middle of history. So I think this is a more optimistic outlook of it. But at the end of the day, it is a great honor to be featured in the film. And the idea that just using my example to tell the rhythm, the ups and downs, the democratic movement of Hong Kong is well, I feel really overwhelmed and honored to be part of it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, just like when we met last time, you're so modest. I mean, what you've done has been important. Like you say, in this journey of changing history. For Joe, you've produced a number of films around like youth activists. I'm curious from your perspective, when you talk a lot about both wanting to show that perspective, but your fears about what will happen to the characters that you follow in your film. Now it's even like, I imagine for you as a filmmaker,
it's one of the hardest parts of making these films is you get to know everybody, and my job is to be objective. My job is I'm not a part of their movement. I'm just somebody that's documenting it. I'm honored that Nathan and Joshua and Agnes allowed me into their world and my team into their world. We made a film prior to this, which is where I met Nathan, called Joshua, Teenager versus Superpower, that focuses on Joshua Wong. That film won Sundance in 2017. I think it's still on Netflix.
It's on Netflix. Yeah.
So, I mean, I've spent nearly almost 10 years with these stories and with Joshua and Agnes and Nathan. And I have a real admiration. I mean, I'm not sure admiration is even a strong enough word. I mean, I look at what they have achieved at such a young age, and I look at their passion and their conviction and their belief in these democratic ideas that I think as Americans we often take for granted and just assume that they're going to be there forever and ever. And I mean, I will never forget, we were at Sundance with the Joshua Wong film, and our film premiered on January 20th, 2017, the day of Trump's inauguration. And there were, even in Park City, there was a women's march and whatnot.
A huge march.
Yeah. I don't even remember the question, but I remember Joshua's answer, and he said, "You all have the luxury of voting again in 4 years. You all have the luxury of, if you don't like who's in charge, in 4 years you get to make a change." And I remember that really stuck with me, because one of the messages that we hammer home with this film over and over again, particularly in these Q&As, is democracy is a participant sport. We all need to be involved. And I think that so many of us take for granted the freedoms that we have in this country because they've always been there, and we just assume that they will always continue to be there. And in making these films, really the takeaway I want people to have is democracy is fragile. We all need to be a part of it. We all need to do what we can to safeguard it, because it isn't a guarantee.
Yeah. Well, and in fact, in the last couple of weeks or months, we've seen around the world backlashes, right? In our own country, democracy is being weaponized in regards to countering protests and social movements, right? So, or progress, more importantly, right? So, how do you consider, like, what is so powerful? Your films will become this document of records. I mean, maybe talk about the breadth of different activists' stories you've told in your films.
For sure. So the first film I made was called #Chicago Girl. It was about a 19-year-old Syrian American girl who was helping coordinate the Syrian revolution. Mm-hmm. And we followed her in Chicago, and she was in charge of an entire network of activists on the ground in various parts of Syria. And this was very early on in Arab Spring. We all thought social media was going to be the tool that brought democracy to the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we were all quite wrong. But it was amazing to watch. I mean, if a protest was happening in Damascus, she would use Google Maps to figure out what the protest route was going to be. Nobody that was actually going to go to the protest would know the route till 5 minutes ahead of time. She had everybody's Facebook logins and passwords. If you were arrested, she could delete you from Facebook, because what the government was wanting to do was get onto your Facebook page mm-hmm. and see who your friends were. So that was the first film. And then I did this film, Joshua, Teenager versus Superpower, that really looked at Joshua Wong, Nathan, and Agnes in the first chapter of their movement, starting with Joshua Wong, who kicked off something called the the anti-national education movement, and that became the umbrella movement.
Umbrella movement, right.
I did a film called My Khoi and the Dissidents about pop singer My Khoi, who was the Lady Gaga of Vietnam. She was very outspoken. She was very much a darling of the Vietnamese Communist Party government, who used her songs in travel campaigns, and she was sort of an ambassador for them for the world. And she started to feel very uncomfortable with watching some of her peers being jailed for free speech. And so she decided to turn her back on pop stardom and really raise her voice for free speech and freedom of expression. She's now in exile in the United States. And then I made this film with Nathan. And, you know, it drives my agents crazy because I'm often asked, what is my brand? And my brand is I make films about ordinary people who do extraordinary things to stand up against massive power structures. That's a very unusual niche that's about this big. But that really is the common theme. It is people like Nathan who are seemingly ordinary people who, you know, are born in a time where they feel the need that they have to stand up and do something extraordinary, and they do.
I mean, I would say it's a little more than a brand. Like it's been in this part of your life purpose. And with those 3 particular countries in particular, if your films aren't made, that history can't be preserved, right?
It is. It's a way to, a question we often get asked, particularly with this film, is, well, why you? You're an American filmmaker, you live in Los Angeles. Who are you to tell this story? And, you know, me and my team get to tell this story because, 1, Nathan entrusted us with telling it. 2, and most importantly, we can tell the story. There's so many people in Hong Kong that aren't able to tell their story. Yeah. So I'm honored that me and my team get to tell this story and get to bring this story to the world. I mean, what my team and I have found in making these films is it's very hard to get people, Americans in particular, to pay attention to things that happen outside of our borders. If I tell you I'm making a film about Hong Kong's relationship to China, I can watch your eyes glaze over. That's not interesting. Yeah. If I tell you I'm making a film about 3 teenagers who lit the fuse on the biggest democracy movement, or one of the biggest democracy movements in history, that's a lot sexier, and I can get you to pay attention to what's going on. And so I always feel blessed when I have somebody like Nathan, who is such an engaging character, such an inspiring presence, that I get to make a film about them. Because yes, it's a film about democracy, but I get to use somebody like Nathan to really get you to pay attention, because he is so, you know, inspirational and engaging.
And wise and purposeful. Nathan, thank you before, early on when you said, like, well, this is part of it. What were the words you used? It's still a step in a journey, right? So, like, where are you in your trajectory? Like, where are you, if you could speak a little bit to where is your journey personally?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I've been involved in the democracy movement for more than a decade. And I've left Hong Kong for 4.5 years. And for me, like, politics is really local. What I can do outside, what I can do overseas is merely amplifying what's happening on the ground and just helping to make things happen. So for me, I always know that at the stage of like Hong Kong democracy, Hong Kong politics, I'm not the main character. I'm just merely supporting the others who are fighting and who are really risking themselves in Hong Kong. Even though I'm now a refugee in London, I got my asylum status around 4 years ago. I'm still having the understanding that I'm here to do international advocacy work, and at the end of the day, I'm here to support people who are on the ground in Hong Kong. So for me, yeah, there's a big part of me trying to do things like this, but there's also a big part of me trying to grow as a person, no matter it is on knowledge about democracy and politics, but also professionally. I think as someone who's left my home country and who are staying in a foreign land, even though for now it's getting more and more familiar, for me, how to survive, how to keep myself afloat, it is also a big question. And for me, as long as having the kind of balance of life and balance of advocacy work, that is how we walk the long way. It is easy to just like be harsh to yourself and to make a sprint and devote everything that you have to a noble passion where it is difficult to sustain. And So for me, yeah, I'm in these kind of different puzzles and different priorities and finding my way out as someone who is really stepping into this unknown future where there is literally no precedent Hong Kong examples that I can take reference from.
I mean, so in a few minutes, we're going to take questions from the audience, so if you can prepare. But I'd like to ask each of you, like, at this moment, what gives you hope? Like, we are in a really just unsettled global moment, right? So, and it feels like since the pandemic started and these movements, that this continues. But like, I'd really love to hear from each of you, like, what is...
People give me hope. I look at all the people that I know. I look at teachers that are teaching my children, coaches that my kids have. I look at people in my community who are doing amazing work. My wife works in after-school programs, and I look at some of the people that work in her programs, and they're affecting some of the most at-risk kids in this country. We're in turbulent times, but there are still people that are just doing amazing work locally that are affecting communities, that are affecting individuals. That's what gives me hope.
Thank you.
Many people go through ups and downs. Realistically speaking, I don't think the system is sustainable. I think even if you look at it into a practical way, in a very long term, I don't see any signs that they can sustain as it is for now. But of course, in the short term, things are difficult to be overturned. But it is not like sometimes like action is not a matter of hope, it's a matter of that if you don't do it, things will only go worse. I think there are a lot of people holding that kind of belief and stepping out of their comfort zone and engaging in a merely impossible war. Just to imagine in 2019, those people who came out marching, those 2 million people who went to protest, I don't think most of them would believe that things can be overturned overnight, but they just know that they have to make a statement and they have to be heard. Otherwise, things will only go worse. I think that's a spirit that we have. It's good to have hope, but even if it is difficult to have one, we just have to remember that like action is the only way to change. And if you don't do it, things are not going to change.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it's also, as difficult as times are, it's astounding to see what you all achieved, right? And I think that has to be honored, and it's changed history, but it doesn't happen without sacrifice and backlash, right? So it's important that we recognize all that the world saw what you all did and was changed by it, right?
First of all, thank you so much for making that film. That was incredible. It was so powerful, and I hope that a lot of people see it because they need to. So I run a research and media institute focused on proliferating privacy tools, trying to get them in the hands of as many people as possible in this country, but also overseas. The reason being that privacy is the foundation of a free society. If you don't have privacy, you can't push back against powerful governments, you can't organize opposition parties, you can't have freedom of the press, etc. And one of the biggest obstacles I've come across that you've both spoken about is the apathy towards this. People not realizing how quickly democracy can be overthrown, and that we need these tools, not necessarily because they're important to us today, but to safeguard our future. So my question is, in the film, it was so clear that youthful energy of these students who just came together, it really galvanized a movement. It got people to care about this issue. And I'm trying to understand, like, how do we galvanize people here? How do we make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success in the future? And how do we get young people involved in this movement so that they can join the force? Because I do feel that there may be a key to getting people to care about this issue and just igniting that spark.
That's a really good question, and that's also a really difficult question to answer because of how local politics are and how how local these social fabrics are. But for me, yes, you're definitely right. Even we're in such a polarized and divided society. I don't think the greatest threat to democracy is our political enemy. It's apathy. It's just people don't care, and how we make sure people care, and how we convince them that there are still people coming out for ideals, for inspirations, for something greater than them, rather than for power, for money, and for other interests. I think this is the key. And for us, we've always been trying to build alliance, trying to make sure that the reason why we engage in politics is not to divide people, but to unite people.
Yeah.
Sometimes some people walk slower. They don't have the capacity to pick up as quick as we are. Sometimes they have misunderstanding, misconceptualization. Sometimes they make mistakes in the way they express themselves. I think the best way is not to alienate them, but rather to be understanding, empathetic, and realize people have their own circumstance and they all have to pay effort to overcome. So I guess I don't have any concrete advice, because this is really not my field of expertise. But I think the idea of, especially in this time where we will easily label people, where social media is about 5 words explaining one philosophy, is much better for us to be patient and to be alliance and get people together as much as we can, and just try to make changes.
Yeah, it's a great question. So do you have a...
Well, I do. It's probably not answering your question directly, but I often will have cynics say to me, "Oh, well, listen, the youth movements in your films, there's such a youthful naivete. They don't, they're too young to understand." And my answer back to them, and I truly believe this, to change the world, you got to believe you can do it. And when you get to be my age, it's hard to believe that you can. I've been around long enough to know that to move the needle, it's really hard. When you see a group of kids, whether it's Nathan, Agnes, Joshua, or any sort of student movement, again, if you got to believe you can do it to do it. And that is what always, where I find hope and inspiration in making these films, because, they're taking on challenges that are so massive. I just have to tip my hat to them, because, again, you got to believe you can do it to do it.
Yeah, and I think there was some research that came out, which wasn't surprising last week, that like in terms of social media platforms, they're fed by the outrage economy, right?
Yes.
So I think this point that Nathan brings up, not being an activist, but I think politically, social justice, there's going to need to be a move back to human connections and rebuilding relationships and communities, right? I think that's the only way to counter these tools that we see in our own elections were created to upend democratic progress, right? Like we literally had one of the heads of the companies help, feed the beast, so to speak, right? So, but it was a great question, right? So.
My question is for you, Nathan. Looking back now, we're here in 2024, looking back, would you have done anything differently knowing the outcomes today? Or do you think once you were on this path, it was just inevitable that, you would probably have to leave Hong Kong one day, that your friends would, end up in jail? Do you think that there was anything you would do differently to prevent the outcome that you have today?
Well, it is a question that I often get asked, and I'm always hesitant to answer like in retrospect, because I think it really presumed that by the time I made that decision like years ago, I already knew the consequence or like the aftermath of it, and I don't tend to think in that way. What I can say is in every decision-making process throughout the way, I made it with 100% of my effort. I tried my best to digest at the time. I made a decision not for myself, but for the movement, and in most of these political decisions, I don't regret it. And even though I knew that could be good alternative, but that was because after that I knew more than when I made the decision. But if you ask me what I really wanted to have an alternative action, I would definitely say that to spend really more time with the people who I adore and admire so much. And they are still in Hong Kong. I think that is one of my biggest regrets, because by the time you were in this fight or flee or very high intensity, very intense situation, it is really difficult for you to just be humane enough to think about, actually, we could just spend time chit-chatting, spend time to just hang out, to just do something relaxing and bond, not in a way of politics, but in a like human to human level. It was so difficult to have that conversation and have that connection. So this is definitely one of my biggest regrets, and I would just spend more time with them, like going for doing stupid thing and silly thing.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hello, thank you for doing this. This is really cool. My question is, as an activist, how did you get through not going through burnout? Because I'm 23 and I advocate for union rights for coffee, and I felt like doing that really burned me out. And so I'm curious, like, what you've done and what you've continued to learn to help ensure that you don't have burnout as an activist.
Oh, I always get burnout. I'm in the middle of a burnout. I guess Joe can tell. Every time when we took interviews, I was so tired and I looked like I almost pass out. But yeah, that's definitely the tenacity that you needed to have. And I think one of the things that you can really think about is you actually don't have to be harsh to yourself. This is not something that you have to single-handedly change. And many change does require a lot of like much bigger picture change. So it's difficult. Like in any circumstance, the things that you're doing is difficult. Activism is by default fighting either against big power or big money, and you only have people, which sometimes it is not enough. So I guess like we will always face burnout, but what we can do is to change the mindset of how we deal with them. Gradually, I learned how not to be too harsh to myself. I learned to be really feeling like relaxing is actually okay, and I don't really have to be full on guard like every day in any moment, and part of me can still live a normal life, and that's how I reconciled with myself. So it is no way to avoid burnout. We just have to be smarter when we deal with that.
Okay, well, I want to thank Nathan. Well, first of all, thank you again for everything you've done. And you're such a modest person, but I think every time people hear about you and or introduce you, we're in awe. So I want to just really appreciate that. Thank you for joining us at such an early time. And Joe, also just, the importance of your work and what you've committed to as a storyteller really will stand the history of time. So
Thank you.
And then finally, thank you to the World Affairs Council and Commonwealth Club for hosting tonight's conversation. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much.